Any man who protects communists is not fit to wear that uniform, General.
In the early 1950s, Senator Joe McCarthy accused various Americans of being secret communists, but many historians argue that he painted with too broad a brush.
Are you now under the direction of the Communist Party?
The cancel culture really is a new form of McCarthyism. It's somewhat ironic given that many of those who are proponents of cancel culture today denounce McCarthyism of the past.
This cancel culture can be likened to reputational terrorism, the destruction of your reputation if you refuse to adopt the new woke orthodoxy. Even once beloved figures like Dr. Seuss are under attack.
The Dr. Seuss brouhaha proves one thing: cancel culture must be canceled.
Consider some of the major problems with cancel culture, such as forced conformity. The proponents of cancel culture are in effect saying, conform to our views or else.
You have to believe like we believe. That's not the way America works. There's plenty of room for people to have different beliefs, and people need to be able to follow their conscience and their religious faith. And the idea that everybody has to believe whatever the government says is not the answer. So that's why we have a free exercise clause. Having that restored with a lot of this sort of woke culture or this cancel culture or this we're gonna bully you culture, really important to have free speech protection and free exercise of religion protection so people can really live free, no matter who is in control of the local government, the state government, or the federal government.
Everyone has to be in lockstep with their program or, you're no good. And yes, it has failed all over the world. I mean, look at Venezuela. It's like the perfect example, because for a long time, the left was saying, oh, Venezuela is the model, Chavistas and these people, look, it's the perfect utopia they're building, and now look at it. People are, have to spend $1 million to get a loaf of bread.
The victims of cancel culture are multiplying. For example, a qualified medical student was kicked out of the University of Virginia. Why? He merely questioned the school's policy on so-called microaggressions. He's now suing the school. This brings us to another major problem of cancel culture. It limits free speech.
It's very disconcerting if you believe in freedom of speech, if you believe in dialogue and free flow of ideas. And what you've seen is almost a complete takeover of the secular university by the progressive left. And so they don't want free speech. They don't believe in free speech. They believe in free speech for themselves, and they do not want to engage in dialogue. They want to shut you down if you disagree with them.
Do you think that the cancel culture is in effect out of step with the real Constitution of America, including the First Amendment, which promotes, and allows for free speech and freedom of religion, freedom of conscience?
I think that cancel culture is at war with constitutional culture. Our Constitution, our system, our institutions were created to bring out the truth, to promote freedom and liberty. Cancel culture is meant to suppress the truth, to make you believe in narratives, to detach people from this culture of liberty and free speech.
Do you have a functioning First Amendment when the cancel culture only allows one side to talk? When you can't even have a debate in this country?
We need to move away from the leftist Marxist view back to the liberal view. Liberalism says, I believe this, you believe that. I think you're stupid for believing that, but you have a right to believe it. And that's the debate, that's the dialogue, that's the disagreement. We also need to get rid of politically correct speech. The fact that I disagree with you and you're offended, welcome to America. You're allowed to be offended, you're allowed to offend me.
Until I began to write my book, I did not realize that there were arguments against freedom of speech. And I began to study this and discovered that it goes back to Herbert Marcuse, who was a Marxist in the 60s, who says that Marxism will never advance as long as the oppressors, the capitalists, have free speech. So they should not be allowed to speak, and they must be silent and give the other side a chance. Now, I studied the contemporary world. There's a man, for example, by the name of Stanley Fish, who has written about free speech. And his view is the very same, except he applies it to race. That it is time for the oppressors to be quiet. It is time for the oppressed to speak.
Even some on the left can see right through cancel culture.
And finally, new rule, liberals need a stand your ground law for cancel culture, so that when the woke mob comes after you for some ridiculous offense, you'll stand your ground.
Cancel culture often claims to target hate. That sounds like a worthy goal, but some on the left, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, claim that Christians who adhere to established biblical morality and oppose, for example, the radical homosexual agenda are supposedly haters. The SPLC finishes the job of reputational terrorism by placing sincere Christians, including this ministry, on their map of hate.
It is just a never-ending litany of reputational terrorism, where what a terrorist tries to do is create fear. So here's the subtle message to a nonprofit leader or to a church pastor: just stay quiet. Let everybody else out of the closet. But just, if you don't want to face all of this terror, all this fear, all this risk, all this danger, just don't speak up for the gospel. Don't speak up for truth. Don't speak up for a viewpoint we disagree with. And if you just quietly keep to yourself, we'll leave you alone. And that's why terrorists can't prevail. That fear-driven culture would eliminate the gospel from the airwaves. You would Google for churches, and only the approved churches with the approved message would show up online. All of a sudden, Facebook Live disappears for the churches that don't hold to the proper viewpoint. And we would begin to see a censorship that would be unparalleled.
I think calling cancel culture reputational terrorism is a good way to put it. I think that's the point of cancel culture, is to make people afraid to say their opinions, afraid to say the truth.
Furthermore, cancel culture pulls us apart. We see this often in many of our schools today.
What is happening on college and university campuses is that many of the radicals in the 1960s that wanted to blow up America, they're leading the colleges and universities. They're the ones that came up with safe spaces, trigger warnings, political correctness, and all of this nonsense. And they are the ones that are allowing students that they should be teaching and setting examples and explaining to them about free speech and First Amendment and tolerance. They are allowing them to run the institutions based on their emotions rather than rational thought. And you think about universities, they used to strive to be places where you got a marketplace of ideas, that you had a diversity of ideas. That's not what they are now. They have become indoctrination centers.
Dr. Carol Swain knows firsthand what the reputational assassins can do to someone. As a professor at Vanderbilt Law School, she was constantly under attack for refusing to toe the leftist line. She retired in 2017 after years of attacks from the likes of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Back in 2009, I wrote a blog criticizing them, and within 6 weeks, I was on the cover of the newspaper, the state newspaper, the Tennessean, with a headline, VU professor slammed for endorsing a racist film, and I was called an apologist for white supremacy. And then the next year, my name was listed in their hate watch. I've been a victim of the Southern Poverty Law Center labeling me as an apologist for white supremacy because of a film I reviewed and gave it a positive rating. I reviewed it for classroom use. And they are clearly about trying to destroy individuals as well as groups that cross their ideological line. And it's a very serious situation in America. And I think that the American people had better wake up soon and start holding groups accountable.
It's all about power. You do whatever you can until you're in charge, because power is what makes the world what it is. And so you use any means necessary. Yeah, you can do it by getting rid of the Constitution or weakening the Constitution or lying about the Constitution. Get away from Republican forms of government until we can take over. and then we're going to have our way. That's always been the premise.